radio commentators cautiously skirted the edge of the controversy, and more than one enthusiast had to be warned by his sponsor. Fistfights started in taverns over the question, and judicious bartenders served beer without offering the objectionable seasoning with it. The Intelligencer at the start was vehemently anti-salt. "Is there an American Cato," LaFacecy asked, "to call for the final ignominy suffered by Carthage to be applied, not to the land of an enemy, but to our own?" Shortly after this editorial, entitled "Carthage, California," appeared, the Intelligencer swung to the opposite side, and LaFacecy offered the pro-salt argument under the heading, "Lot's Wife." The Daughters of the American Revolution declared themselves in favor of salt, and refused the use of Constitution Hall to an anti-salt meeting. Stung, the Central Executive Committee of the Communist Party circulated a manifesto declaring the use of salt was an attempt to encircle not the grass, for that was a mere subterfuge of imperialism, but the Soviet Union, and called upon all its peripheral fringe to write their congressmen and demonstrate against the saline project. From India, the aged Mohandas Gandhi asked in piping tones why such a valuable adjunct was to be wasted in rich America, while impoverished ryots paid a harsh tax on this necessity of life. And the Council of People's Commissars, careless of the action of the American Stalinists, offered to sell the United States all its surplus salt. The herring picklers of Holland struck in a body, while the American salt refiners bid as one to produce on a cost-plus basis. This last was a clincher, and the obscurantic anti-salts received the death blow they richly deserved. The Communist Party reversed themselves swiftly. All respectable and patriotic people lined up behind salt. With such popular unanimity apparent, the government could do no less than take heed. A band 20 miles wide, stretching from Oceanside to the Salton Sea, from the Salton Sea to the little town of Mojave, and from there to Ventura, was marked out on maps to be salt zone by the very same bomber command which had dropped the spectacular but futile incendiaries. The triumph of the salt people was ungenerous in its enthusiasm. The disgruntled anti-salts, now a mere handful of diehards publishing an esoteric press, muttered everyone would be sorry. Wait and see. The grass itself waited for nothing. It seemed to take new strength from the indignities inflicted upon it, and it increased, if anything, its tempo of growth. It plunged into the ocean in a dozen spots at once. It swarmed over sand which had never known anything but cactus, and the Sierra Madres became great humps of green against the skyline. This last conquest shocked those who had thought the mountains immune in their inhospitable heights. Cynodon dactylon, uninoculated, had always shunned coldness, though it survived some degrees of frost. The giant growth, however, seemed to be less subject to this inhibition, though it too showed slower progress in the higher and colder regions. The Intelligencer planned to move from Pomona to San Bernardino, and, if necessary, to Victorville. Daily, LaFacecy became a sterner taskmaster, a more pettishly exacting employer. By the living guts of William Lloyd Garrison, he raged, had no one ever driven the simple elements of punctuation into my bloody head? Had no schoolmaster, in moments of heroic enthusiasm, attempted to pound a few rules of rhetoric through my incrassate skull? Had I never heard of taste? Was the word style outside my masculine vocabulary? What the devil did I mean by standing there with my mouth open, exposing my unfortunate teeth for all the world to see? Was it possible for any allegedly human to be as addle-pated as I? And, had I been thrust from my mother's womb, I suppress his horrible adjectives, only to torment and afflict his long-suffering editorial patience. 100 times I was tempted to sever my connection with this journalistic autocrat. My column was widely read, and 2 publishing houses had approached me with the idea of putting out a book, any editorial revision and emendations to be taken care of by them without disturbing me at all. I could have allied myself with almost any paper in the country, undoubtedly at better than the meager stipend LaFacecy doled out to me. But I think loyalty is one of the most admirable of virtues, and it was not in my nature to desert the Intelligencer. Certainly not till I could secure a lengthy and ironclad contract, such as for some reason other papers seemed unwilling to offer me. In accord with this innate loyalty of mine, I take no credit for it, I was born that way, I did not balk at the assignments given me, though they ranged from the hazardous to the absurd. One of the more pleasant of these excursions thought up by Mr. Lafacici was to fly over the grass and to Catalina, embark on a chartered boat there, and survey the parts of the coast now overrun. A fresh point of observation. Accompanying me was the movie cameraman, Rafe Slafe, as uncommunicative and earnest in his medications as before. It was a sad sight to see neat rectangular patterns of roads and highways, cultivated fields and orange groves, checkered towns and sprawling suburbs come to an abrupt stop, where they were blotted out by the regimented uniformity of the onrushing grass. For miles we flew above its dazzling green, until our eyes ached from the sameness and our minds were dulled from the lack of variety below. On the sea, far ahead, a frothing whitecap broke the monotony of color, a flying fish jumped out of the water to glisten for a moment in the sun, loose seaweed floated on the surface, to change in some degree the intense blue. But here below, no alien touch lightened the unnatural homogeneity. No solitary tree broke this endless pasture, now healed of the wounds inflicted by the incendiary bombing. No salt lick, wandering stream, or struggling bush enlivened this prairie. There was not even an odd conformation, a higher clump here or there, a dead patch to relieve the unimaginative symmetry. I have read of men going mad in solitary confinement from looking at the same unchanging walls. Well, here was a solitary cell hundreds of miles in area, and its power to destroy the mind was that much magnified. I got little consolation from the presence of the others, for the pilot was engaged in navigation, while Slafe was, as ever, single-mindedly recording mile after mile of the verdant map beneath, never pausing nor speaking, though how he justified the use of so much film when one foot was identical with what went before, and the next, I could not understand. At last we cleared the awful cancer and flew over the sea. 1,000 variations I had never noticed before offered themselves to my suddenly refreshed eyes. Not for one split second was the water the same. Leaping, tossing, spiraling, foaming back upon itself, making its own shadows and mirroring in an infinitely faceted glass the sunlight, it changed so constantly it was impossible to grasp even a fraction of its mutations. But Slafe evidently did not share my blessed relief, for he turned his camera back to catch every last glimpse of the solid green I was so happy to leave behind. At the airport, on the way to the boat, on the little vessel itself, I expected Slafe to relax, to indulge in a conversational word, to do something to mark him as more than an automaton. But his actions were confined to using the nasal syringe, to exchanging one camera for another, to quizzing the sun through that absurd lorgnette, and to muttering over cans of film, which he sorted and resorted, always to his inevitable discontent. While we waited to start, a perverse fog rolled between us and the mainland. It made a dramatic curtain over the object of our visit, and emphasized the normality and untouchedness of Avalon behind us. As the boat got under way, strain my eyes as I could eastward, not the faintest suggestion of the ominous outline showed. We sped toward it, cutting the purple sea into white foam. Slafe was in the bow, customarily taciturn. The crew were busy. Alone on board, I had no immediate occupation, and so I took out my copy of the Intelligencer, and after reading the column which went under my name, and noting the incredible bad taste which had diluted when it had not excluded everything I had written, I turned, as for consolation, to the market quotations. The Dow Jones average was down again, as might be expected since the spread of the wheat had unsettled the delicate balance of the stock market. My eyes automatically ran down the column and over to the corner where stocks were quoted in cents to reassure my faith in Consolidated Pemmican and Allied Concentrates. There it was, immovable through any storm or stress, or injudicious investment by Albert Wiener. CP&AC, 1/16. I must have raised my eyes from the newspaper just about the time the fog lifted. Before us, like the smoke wreath accompanying the discharge